My name is Christina Weaver. I was here last time. It's really great to see familiar faces. For members of the public, I'm a public policy mediator and was asked to help to facilitate just two series of meetings. So this is the second of two meetings that is looking at recommendations around reopening the winter dredge fishery. Because I think the CMAQ members know each other quite well, and it's your second time seeing me, we were going to go ahead and skip introductions, if that's cool, and be able to move kind of right into the meat of the meeting. Last time, and I'm using a microphone just to say because we do have this live streaming, so this allows people remotely to have a chance at following along and listening in. One of the guidelines for the meeting is to ask members of the committee to also try to use the microphone. We have two in circulation, this one and there's one on the table. The other meeting request is just to make sure that we are creating space for all voices on the committee to participate, sharing the airtime. Any other requests for having a productive meeting from the group? I'll say to members of the public, we're really glad you're here, and we're going to absolutely have time for public comment at the end of the meeting. We're aiming again to have a 2-hour meeting, so wrapping up at 6 and moving into public comment at that point. Last time we had a presentation from Alexa, and there was a lot of discussion around really what are the questions, clarifying questions and information needs that folks would need in order to make recommendations around reopening the dredge fishery. So having been able to discuss folks' questions and share questions with staff, today we're going to be moving towards actually making some of those recommendations. So having more of a decision-making kind of dialogue, and we'll be talking about some strategies for having a really focused process for that. First, though, we want to just call attention to these packets on the table. This is the information that you received ahead of time, that sort of responses to the questions that you asked last time. Knowing that not everybody will have had time to review ahead of time, we want to give folks about up to 5 minutes now to glance through it. I will say that as I understand from the staff who prepared this information, a lot of the information may not be as critically bearing on the conversation today. So we want to move into dialogue quickly and not spend a whole lot of time on these responses. But we do want to give about 5 minutes for you all to review it if you need it. If you have reviewed it already, you can kind of put the packet down when you feel oriented to it. And then we can have clarifying questions about this material. Okay, so we'll just take a few minutes to do that. Also a reminder from last time that we're going to try to keep a queue for dialogue. So as you have questions, you can raise your name tag. And if you have questions about the information that was provided, it'd be helpful for you to signal that way.
Chris is one right in front of you.
Does everyone, if there is an extra one here?
Oh, I thought you wanted the light.
Looks like a few folks are still reviewing, so we'll give that another minute or so, and then we can move into questions. Okay, let's move into clarifying questions about the material that was provided.
Yes, we talked about the economic impact of this and all, and you came up with these prices that y'all got from Delaware. $1.65 a pound for dredge crabs, that's $66 a bushel. Pot and trap crabs, you get $2.35 and $94. Well, it's less than 30% difference, and you got 42.5% written down there, 42.41 to be exact. How did we come up with that?
It's a percent difference.
I just did the math. 66 over 94 is 70% of it, so you're losing 29.8 to be exact, not 42.
Maybe I did it wrong. I'll check it again.
It's not as big of a difference. That
It's still about, how much did you say?
29.8%, but
I'll check it again.
42 is a lot closer to half. That's a little bit misinformation for us. I just wanted to check and see. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to check on the math there. Were there other clarifying questions or corrections that folks saw? Any objection to moving on from this part of the meeting? Okay, great. So we're going to move very quickly into dialogue around your recommendations. And I'm going to introduce a process to help really focus that conversation. But before that, we're going to have Alexa offer sort of a framing presentation, really a reminder of the goals that brought us here and the sort of pathways and options for the potential different levels of recommendation that CMAQ might make. Do you
Thanks,
need a mic,
Christina.
Alexa? Yeah, you got it.
Nope, got one here. So we discussed the meeting goals last time. The overarching goal is to provide recommendations on how to implement a crab dredge fishery. And staff are hoping for 2 outcomes from this. We're hoping to get a CMAQ recommendation we can present to the commission saying this is CMAQ's preferred options. And we're also looking for CMAQ to inform the staff recommendation. You know, there are things staff come into this meeting recommending. There are things that there's a lot more that we are very open to. So, you know, we are absolutely listening to the discussion and letting the discussion help form our staff recommendation. So I had emailed the committee. These were the discussion topics we're going to be covering. Conservation equivalency for the dredge fishery, how much quota for the dredge fishery, how many licenses and who's eligible, the dredge area, the dredge season, gear restrictions, and then we have a slide that's kind of standalone of just other measures. For example, harvest limit enforcement, for example, daily limits, allowed species reporting. The only other thing to follow up on from last meeting was there were a few questions for VIMS, and I'm gonna let Ram respond to those. He has the list of questions we provided him from you all.
So would you like me to, it's on, I assume?
Yep.
Okay. Do you want me to just go through each
Yep.
one then? Okay, so the first question is, how does imprecision in a winter dredge survey juvenile abundance estimate impact exploitation rate? So what we typically assume and what the stock assessment assumes is that we're missing about 60% of the juveniles. So that's actually incorporated or integrated into all the estimates. So that, unfortunately, we were not funded, VIMS, to do a long-term juvenile assessment. That would require different vessels and so on, and the state has not funded us to do that, so we can't go out there. We did that one year. We're able to do it if we were to have the funding, but we don't have the funding. So we have to make an assumption based on 1 year's study and based on the stock assessment itself to try to match up all the data and so on. So we're assuming that it's not going to affect it that much based on our assumptions. Does anybody have any further questions? No? Okay, so the winter dredge and the spring pot fisheries target the same population. What difference does it make if a crab is caught in the winter versus spring? It says there's a new paper from VIMS that discusses how important spring spawning crabs are for recruitment. So just to give you a little bit of background, in the bay, the blue crab population and stock is largely dependent on reproduction by the first years. We have several lines of evidence, including from that paper, as well as even Van Engel, that information on that only about 10%, somewhere in that ballpark, of females that are spawning, that are part of the spawning stock, are those that have already survived the full year and are spawning again. So we are dependent, heavily dependent, to the tune of 80 to 90% on the very newly matured females in the bay. All right, so that gives you at least the background of that. So in terms of whether you catch a crab in winter versus spring, if you go from winter to spring, then the natural mortality of those females is relatively low. So it's likely that without fishing pressure, that most of the females from the winter that survive the winter are then going to make it to spawn. So it's, from everything that we know, all the evidence we have, it shouldn't matter as much as the total number of females that's being caught. That's important. And that's why we're talking about conservation equivalency. So if you don't protect them, if you harvest them in the winter, then obviously you have to have some equivalency from the spring pot fishery or from the sanctuary or so. So furthermore, those females that are about to spawn in the spring, in the late spring, early summer, those brand new, newly matured ones have the highest reproductive potential, meaning that over the next few months, when they can spawn a second or third time, then those are the most fecund, they have the most sperm available. As most of you know, the female basically fertilizes subsequent egg batches with the sperm from a single mating. Okay, so she stores the sperm, and she has the most sperm in the spring, and then that goes down, so those females are the most fecund, and that's why we talk about how important it is to try to allow as many of those to spawn. Why is there so much emphasis, so third question, why is there so much emphasis on female crabs? And there's two questions there. The other one's, what about low fertilization rate? So The reason we emphasize that is from various studies, we've shown that the number of young crabs, juveniles, the recruitment, is partially dependent on the number of spawning females. We think that if you look at the variation from year to year in the number of new crabs that are in the bay, the new cohort, that about at least around half of the variation in that is accounted for by the number of spawning females. The rest of that variation is due to environmental conditions, things like predation potentially, and so on. So we know that the basis, at least, of recruitment is the spawning stock, so that's why we have that. So now the flip side, so that's females. The flip side, what about low fertilization rate? Several lines of evidence, again, indicate to us that fertilization rate is not an issue for the blue crab, and for a couple different reasons. So again, one of my recent doctoral students had a study where she was looking at, she actually quantified the number of sperm, number of eggs that the females were producing, and according to that research, that a female would not become sperm limited until about the 3rd year or so. And very few, as I said, only 10% make it to the 2nd year, and a very small percent make it to the 3rd year. So that means that a sperm limitation doesn't appear to be working in the bay. Also, when we look at females, as far as their egg masses, they're all fertilized. You don't find females with inviable egg masses. So all that put together tells us that sperm limitation is not an issue at this point. Now again, if females were to survive an extra couple of years, then they might become sperm limited. That's for sure, but not with the current situation, and not with the situation that's been here now for several decades. Last one, considering alternative forms of conservation, equivalency, and compensation, how could the savings associated with year-round area closure be quantified? That's something that obviously BMRC staff would have the information for that. They would know, they have estimates of the catch that's coming from particular locations at particular times. So that's something that could be calculated for a year-round closure. I'm assuming that the year-round area closure, I'm not sure whether the area pertains only to the historical spawning sanctuary. I'm assuming it's not a moratorium, meaning everything closes down. I'm assuming it would be something like a year-round closure of the historical sanctuary in the lower bay. And that could be quantified, and that is one of the alternatives for conservation equivalency.
Yeah, we know that's something that has come up in discussions, and we'll be getting to discussing sanctuary changes in our conservation equivalency section.
Okay.
So thanks.
Okay, so those are the responses to the
Thank you.
4 sets of questions.
Thank you, Ron. Any quick clarifying questions?
I do.
Okay, go ahead.
What does Vince feel about crab dressing? Do they support it or don't they support it? That's important to know.
Yeah, we're gonna be discussing that. We have a recommendation in, sorry. So we have a recommendation, a VIM's recommendation, that if the dredge fishery were to be reopened, that it would be deployed over mud bottom. And we've worked with BMRC's polygons and so on to indicate which areas we feel would be acceptable, along with the need to have some kind of compensation, conservation equivalency.
So you do support it, Vince does.
We support a particular, yeah. Pardon?
Tell me what the particular part
I
is.
think there, They're gonna go through that.
So we're gonna be
Yeah.
stepping, kind of step by step through the plan, so like dredge area is a section, and we'll be talking about Vim's recommendations there.
And the second question is, based on what you said a few minutes ago, which is the most important as far as the spawning stock? Is it the winter crab, or is it the spring tripod crab? Which is the most important to conserve? Which one? And Vim's view.
Yeah, so, in my view, if you're talking about the spring females being those before they're caught by the pot fishery, then there's not much of a difference, right? The winter females are gonna survive, unless it's a freeze, they're gonna survive to the early spring. So those are almost equivalent.
Okay, and we might have more insights that come out in the dialogue. I think Alexa has a few more slides.
So this is a slide we saw last time, just kind of stepping through the timeline. In June, the commission repealed the prohibition of crab dredging in Virginia waters. So unless Virginia establishes a regulation pertaining to crab dredging, the fishery will open according to the Code of Virginia, but with no stipulations as to who's eligible, how much, how, only what's in code. So at your last meeting, you laid the groundwork for developing the winter fishery recommendations, and that's what we're doing today. CMAQ will develop the recommendations for a winter fishery. On September 24th, the commission will hear a request for public hearing to provide input on the dredge regulation. This is something we used to do more a few years ago, is staff would go before the commission and say, this item is upcoming, here's the background information. Unlike how we used to do requests for public hearing, we will be taking public comment at this meeting, and then taking public comment again at the October 28th meeting, where the commission will vote on a new dredge regulation. So as for those public comment opportunities, there's of course today. At the September 24th commission meeting, that request for public hearing. At the October 28th commission meeting, when they'll vote, and I do want to note that that commission meeting was moved due to a scheduling conflict, and it will be on a Monday, unlike our usual Tuesdays. And there'll be two, so you can come and speak in person at those meetings. You have to physically be here at the building during the meeting to speak. But you can also submit comments online through the agency website and through Virginia Town Hall, which is a statewide tool that allows the public to comment on current actions being considered by state agencies. And I will note that those two online options can only accept comments on these matters once the public notice is published, which will be at least 2 weeks before the commission meeting. So decisions the commission will be making is, what does a new dredge fishery regulation look like? The commission can decide annually whether to open the dredge fishery or close it, similar to how it has been managed in the past. And if they do, the management structure will already be in place. So unlike in 2008 when we repealed all the crab dredging regulations, the regulations will still be in place, and as part of that regulation, the commission can open or close the fishery. The decision, of course, will the 2024-2025 dredge fishery season be open or closed? And then will conservation equivalency be put into effect, and how? A staff recommendation for an open dredge fishery will include effort and harvest reductions, possibly amongst other measures, to offset the increase in harvest from an open dredge fishery. So these are the decisions the commission will be making at their meetings. So with that in mind, we're going to be moving into making those recommendations through a tool Christina has for us, and she's going to explain that.
Yeah, and before we do that, I see there are a couple questions around what's been presented. Is that right? Can we go to Tom and then Chris?
I assume, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that part of the public notice, because you cannot, the commission cannot make a regulation that is less restrictive than the, or more restrictive than the public notice, is that the fishery remains closed this winter.
So that's part of why we're doing a request for a public hearing, is the commission can give us guidance on what version of the regulation they'll be voting on in October, and therefore we can put out the public notice.
I'm
to
looking at it
cover.
from the other way, and I'm not saying it's going to happen or it's not going to happen, but suppose there was a, like there was in, I guess, 2003 or whenever it was closed, a substantial public comment or input that says, please keep it closed, including, as we heard, at least from the audience in the last meeting, from other commercial crabbers who don't want to see it open due to conservation equivalency, or because, as one buyer pointed out to staff after the meeting, because there's really not the market for the dredged crabs anymore, because they have gotten the crabs coming up from Louisiana or wherever in the south that are much higher quality. But the point is that if staff does not advertise the potential for a closure, whether it happens or not is a separate issue, then there can't be one. And that, I think, restricts the public who is against this, the opening the crab dredge fishery, and the commercial crabbers who are not crab dredgers, who are against it, their opportunity to ask that it remain closed.
Tom, so we spoke with our council, and we will make sure that we notice for both of those options in October. The commission will discuss what's going to happen in September. That's why we're going to have the request for public hearing. But in October, the way that we will notice it will allow either the commission to open or close. We'll just see how that ends up playing out. But point taken, and we already thought of that. We're good.
Yeah, we don't want to notice ourselves into a box.
That was my concern.
Thank you. Chris?
Just a real quick question about if commission action to set up a regulation. The way the Code of Virginia reads now is that any boat licensed to dredge crabs, being that we don't currently have a license, if we did nothing, could the season actually not open because there would be no licensed boats?
Excellent question.
We have to open that section of code, that regulation too.
Chris, I couldn't hear you. Can you repeat that? Sure.
Sure. So the way the Code of Virginia currently reads is that it is unlawful for anyone to dredge crabs that's not licensed. Wait, let me get back to it. It's unlawful for any boat licensed to dredge crabs. So we currently don't have, we don't have licenses, right? So what I'm asking is, I think the way you have talked about this meeting, last meeting, if we don't do anything, we revert to what's in the code, which obviously does have a season and things like that. But the code also specifies you have to have a license, and we don't currently have a license, right?
We have to open regulation 1190.
And we're trying to not put ourselves into a box.
No, I understand that. I just want to make sure, yeah.
It says, it's our licensing I'm sorry. It's our licensing regulation where we have to add the licenses. We'd have to add that in there.
Which we don't have one now. We don't have a
It's not in there right now, no. It's-
So if there was no, regulatory change, there would be no fishery, because there's no license.
I would leave that up to council. I don't think it's appropriate for us to answer
Okay.
that.
Yeah.
But it's a good point, Chris. We'll make sure that that gets added to the next
Okay.
discussion with council.
I'm sure you give everybody a note from their mother.
Both very good points. Another point on what's been presented on before we move into dialogue?
I've got a question for Rob.
Okay.
Can you hear me, Rob?
I can hear you.
Yeah. How about now? Okay. You said that if we closed to certain areas of the bay for dredging, that would work towards conservation equivalency. So, is that what? Did I understand you right there?
It was for year round.
Year round. Okay. so it would affect crab potting too. So if we just dredged on the muddy bottom in the areas that y'all had established as the muddy area, that with the rest of the bay being off limits, then that wouldn't count towards a conservation equivalency.
Not during the winter.
Okay.
Okay, all right, so as another question, go ahead.
Where is the quota gonna come from? Is it gonna come from the crab bottoms?
Where is the quota gonna come from?
97% of our harvest comes from crab pots, so that's where we would have to make reductions.
So how much for the production?
That depends on the quota. So there's a few decisions the committee will be making today that are interconnected as far as how much we'll have to reduce, what the preferred quota will be, and then that kind of ties into how many licenses to allow. So that's something we are going to be walking through.
Okay, and we want to get to that part quickly, but I do see one more question.
Why do we need a conservation equivalency on, we're not a quota-based fishery as the crab industry as a whole. And we have not been close to our lower threshold in I think it was 1 year in the past 20, I think is what it's been. I mean, most years we're twice as high as what the threshold is. I know we're not at that target number, but I mean, we're nowhere near in danger. We don't come close to our exploitation rate. I mean, I did it, I think it was 13 out of the past 20 years. We've been under the target. We've only been over the threshold. I think it was 2013 was the last time since 2002. I mean, what is the reasoning for the conservation equivalency when we're not even catching what our target is on the exploitation rate year in, year out?
So there's a few things. One is we don't know what effect this will have on the exploitation rate, especially since 96% of the harvest is female crabs, and the female exploitation rate is what we use for management. 2, this was part of the 34% reduction we took in 2008. The other jurisdictions also took their 34% reductions. So if we're walking that back, we have to compensate somehow.
So I'm sensing that we're going to be getting into discussion that might link to recommendations. So what I'm going to ask folks, unless they have clarifying kind of quick questions about what's been presented, I'd like to
slides we've just seen.
I'd like to move us into what I think will be a productive and focused way of getting at all of this. Do you have a quick clarifying question, Peter?
Yeah. The question I have is, when we did that 34% reduction in order to make a change in it, how long is that supposed to remain in effect? Is there something in the agreement that says that goes on forever? Or does that change as the abundance increases?
Until the jurisdictions agree. We've been trying to reach that target of 196 million crabs. We haven't reached that yet, but we do have the stock assessment coming up that will tell us if we have new targets. So again, this is something we can discuss with the conservation equivalency discussion.
196 million crabs.
Female crabs.
Female crabs.
Or until that number is adjusted to another level. Let's not
Okay.
decide.
You have a quick response to that, Ram? Okay, and then I'm gonna kind of cut this off so that we can move into seeing where the whole room is at with some of these topics and trying to build some recommendations.
So I just wanted to respond to Corey's question. It's a good question, and actually partially to Pete as well. So what we want to do in terms of the abundance of the stock is we want to be bouncing around that target. Like, we don't have to be above it, but we want to be bouncing around it. And recently we haven't been bouncing around. We've been bouncing between the target and the threshold. The really concerning part is that juvenile, from the winter dredge survey, the juvenile abundance we've seen in the last 3 years have been extremely low. And that really concerns us, that we haven't seen that jump up. And that's why we want to we want to maintain the status quo. And then getting to Pete, what'll happen is with the stock assessment, and then there's updated stock assessments every year, we're not necessarily beholden to that 34% impermanence, where what we're doing is once we have a stock assessment and then an update, then that can tell us, hey, can we back off some? What do we need to do? So it's definitely not something that we're saying, okay, that's it for infinity, and we're gonna do that.
Okay. Marshall, real quick, okay? Real quick.
I won't do nothing quick. You said that the juvenile stock assessment's been down 3 years in a row. Now, when you say juvenile, what are we talking about?
Less than 60 millimeters, which is less than about 2.5 inches.
2.5 inches. You have any idea why that is? We damn sure don't catch a crab. Not those little teeny ones, we don't.
Right. Yeah, that's where the other 50% comes in. We think part of it is that that if we boosted the females, that would boost the number of juvenile crabs. And then the other part is that because we're not bouncing around the target, we're down between the target and threshold. Preferably, if we were bouncing around the target, we'd have a larger spawning stock, and then we get higher recruitment. But we also realize that a lot of that has to do with predation, environmental conditions, and such. So what we can manage is the spawning stock, and so that's why we think we need to just hold the line for now.
And the stock assessment team is going to be looking at other factors impacting the population and the juveniles. They've been looking at all sorts of data sets from, temperature, oxygen, predation. So the stock assessment team will be trying to find what other factors are impacting. Stock assessment isn't just here's harvest, here's abundance. So we're working on that.
I understand you can't do environmental impacts, but predation, what do you do? How do you determine predation? What is VIMS doing to determine how much of our crabs are being?
They'll be looking at all available.
That's a big issue. Predation is a big issue, and I feel as though that's never been looked into like it should. Environmental, we can't do much about that. But predation, if the small crabs are not there 3 years in a row, something happens eventually. If you don't have no little ones, you're gonna have no big ones later on. And you're saying that if we have more females, then you're gonna have, naturally you'll have more babies. But we need to find out why. We've got plenty of females, but the babies ain't growing up, and the workmen aren't catching them.
I totally agree with you, and that's one of the main things that we're gonna work on. That's one of the main things that VIMS is gonna be doing as part of the stock assessment. Obviously, the stock assessment is Maryland. It's got several institutions.
Well, this predation thing's been going on for years and years and years and years. I mean, you're just now looking into it?
Well,
We've been talking about
no,
this for years
no, I
and
mean,
years
there
and years.
have been.
So tell me something. Tell me something that you found out with predation. Tell me something.
Okay,
You know,
so.
25, 30 years is a long time listening to this.
So first of all, to try to nail that down takes a lot of work and a lot of funding, because you have to catch the fish, you have to catch them at the right time, you have to do their gut contents, and you have to also sample the juveniles.
We've
And so,
had them pictures for years and years we've showed you.
But this is the
They
first
showed you
stock
that for
assessment.
Years and years and years.
I
So
know.
this is the first stock assessment we're having in 13 years, so we're making sure we're looking at it.
So I definitely hear, and I think we need to record that the issue of predation is really critically important. And hearing that,
25 years ago, eh?
you've been hearing that for decades now,
Yes.
and that I hear the frustration, definitely. And bridging us towards the goal for today's meeting to come up with there's two levels of recommendations at play. There's the need for CMAQ to generate recommendations for opening the dredge fishery. And you heard Alexa talk about the different possibilities this season and beyond. And then there's staff listening to inform its recommendations, so wanting to understand what you all want. To try to help us get through the complexity of this with all the kind of list of topics that Alexa put up, and some of them interlink and relate to each other, and also to try to make sure that all of the voices and stakeholders represented in the room are in that recommendation building conversation, I want to introduce a consensus building technique, which in my 20 years as a mediator has always proven effective in helping people focus and share their concerns efficiently, and then share their ideas to get past those concerns. So I want to say this is not voting. I know that you all use a voting process, so this is not intended to replace that. It's really just to have a productive conversation for the next hour and a half. The goal of consensus building, and I don't know, has anyone been in a process before that used like a consensus building technique? I see some people nodding. The goal is to give you more than yes or no, to give you another option. So if you hear an idea or a proposal, you don't have to just say, I'm for it or I'm against it. You can give a third option to say, you know, I would support this. I have some questions and concerns about it, but I would support it. So that you can let the room know what issues are you really, really concerned about, are high priority for you, what issues you need us to slow down about, and maybe there are some issues that we can move more quickly around and not get derailed in conversation around. And we are not here today to achieve consensus. We're not here today to achieve full agreement. We're here to test and see where people are on the different possibilities for opening the dredge fishery, and to kind of see whether there are new options that haven't been explored yet that more people might be able to get behind, because you all represent really important stakeholder interests, not just yourselves, right, at the table, and kind of see how far we can get. It is a lot and it is complex. There's a lot of topics to get through. That being said, I want to teach, maybe we can go to the next slide. I want to teach the technique really quickly, and then we'll try it out by me asking if you're willing to use it over the course of the rest of this meeting. Nothing binding beyond that. Essentially, if anybody in the room wants to put a proposal, like I have this recommendation for conservation equivalency, or I have this recommendation for quotas, you can say, I have a proposal, I want to put this out here. I, as the facilitator, might be listening to dialogue and hearing a proposal coming up, and I might say, it sounds like this is what we're talking about, let's see where we stand. Okay, so when we call for a consensus test, you would put up 3, 2, or 1 finger, and I always say this is the finger for the 1 finger. So if you put up 3 fingers around that proposal or that idea, you're showing, I fully support this. As far as I'm concerned, we can move on, okay? If you put up 2 fingers, this is that third option. You're saying, I would support this. I would not undermine it. I would support it if it carried. I would support it in and outside of this room. But I do have some questions and concerns, and I just want the room to know that I have some questions and concerns. If you put up 1 finger, you're saying, I would not be able to support this idea. I would have to oppose it. It would compromise my core values or the folks I represent here. We need to talk about this some more, okay? I, as a facilitator, would turn to the person who has 1 finger up and say, okay, share your concern and share what it would take to shift you from a 1 to a 2 or a 3. So I'm asking folks to be in a solution-oriented mindset, right? I'm asking you to modify the proposal or put something new out there, or really share openly what your concerns are, okay? If a lot of people are at 2 and we have time, we'll do the same thing, because we would like to hear what those concerns and questions are. We might discover some of these issues everyone supports. We can move more quickly. We don't have to talk about them a ton. Next slide. So I always, when I introduce this, I always ask us to practice it by seeing if you're willing to use it. So I'm going to articulate the proposal that we'll use this 3-2-1 consensus testing tool during this meeting, we're not using it to vote, we're using it to surface issues, gauge where there's agreement, and try to focus the conversation. Anybody have a question about that proposal? Is it clear? Okay, so I'm gonna ask everyone who has a seat at the table to put up 3, 2, or 1 fingers. And I'm gonna ask Alexa to help me count the 3s, if you don't mind. So put 3 if you're willing to use this technique. 3 fingers up. 1 if you're not willing to use it. You're too many questions and concerns. 2 if you're fine with it, you have some questions about it, but you're fine with it. Okay.
Those who have arthritis.
I can't see.
Which finger were we supposed to use for one?
This one. The index finger. Are you
Forward quicker without this.
in my experience, well, and if you object, are there any objections, strong objections in the room? Folks willing to roll, so Tom, what's your concern?
I think that, okay, so I just wrote down things. Now, people know that I'm not necessarily backing this concept. But I think there's 2 choices that need to be made, and we aren't gonna make those choices. One is, or 3 choices. One, is the fishery gonna be opened? That's a commission call with staff recommendations and VIM's recommendations. 2, what is conservation equivalency? If they do open it. Again, we can talk about what those might be. I think the first thing we need to settle on is which I thought was what this meeting was supposed to be about, is what would the fishery look like? So I wrote down 6 things.
Tom, can I stop you just for a second? Because as soon as we know our decision-making process for generating the recommendation, we can go to your proposal. But
You're gonna do what you want. I don't have to agree with it.
no, you don't.
This is my proposal. You got plenty of 3s. So here's my how many licenses? How do you decide who gets those licenses? Who decides the mud bottom regions and versus the not mud bottom regions?
Tom, we're gonna get to this,
Right, but these are the questions we need to answer.
and they're coming up right after this.
And I think we just went through these quickly. We could all get out of here soon.
So, Tom, would you rather hear from everyone in turn? I don't want to impose this tool. I don't want to do what I want to do. I'm offering this tool because I've been in many meetings where lots of people in the room right now have a way of understanding what we have to do.
Some of us have been meeting together on these topics for in excess of 20 years.
I understand. And so, if
We
you-
know how, we all have feelings about how other people feel about things. A lot of us understand how other people think about this. We have gone through development of regulations before. We haven't needed to raise 3 fingers and all this kind of stuff. We discuss it, come to a consensus or vote on it, and come to decisions. We have successfully done that for in excess of 30 years.
Okay, so it sounds like, just to run the process, it sounds like, Tom, you were saying, let's just do it the way we've always done it?
Yes.
That would make you happier. So if folks could put up their maybe everyone's a 3 on that. We'd rather just do it the way we do it, and I can just be here to monitor the queue and to try and ensure all voices are heard. So that's a new proposal on the table. Let's just make decisions and recommendations the way we've always done it. Can I see if people feel better about that? 3, 2, 1 about that? Okay. See, this is a real-time example of how sometimes your concern is surfaced, and now, Chris, you have a concern that I'd love to hear. I think it sometimes saves time to talk about how we're gonna get there for a little while. So, Tom, do you mind if we hear Chris's concern?
Can I address a little bit of Tom's concerns there?
Can we?
I'll put up 10 fingers.
Yes.
I'll
yes.
defer to Peter.
Okay,
Yes.
Peter, and then Chris also has concerns.
Okay. I think we're getting the cart before the horse here a little bit. Nobody has any idea how many people are gonna get involved in this to begin with. Number one, because of lack of infrastructure. There's nobody to make dredges anymore much. North Machine, maybe somebody, you know, one of the major places that dredges were made was in Lynn Haven years ago. Most of the people that were in this fishery to begin with are either my age or gone. There's just a few that did it that are younger. There's only a handful of people that have a dredge rig now, and those are mostly the ones that have conked over the last several years since this thing has been closed. It's gonna cost a considerable amount of money to put a rig together. Why don't you consider, before we even make any decisions on equivalencies and conservation, or how many people are gonna get involved, have the VMRC do a survey of how many people that would be eligible, and I think we determined that by the old list. I don't know how many people are still.
I think they did a survey.
Yeah.
What'd they come up with, how many people would be interested in doing it?
I believe,
You
I
can't
think-
set a quota or do anything until you know how many people are gonna be involved. It might not even amount to
only
anything.
about 24 or 25 of the people surveyed, of the 43 people surveyed actually responded. And of those, all but one said they would be interested. That's something but how many people is something we'll get
Well, you know,
into in the licensing
This is
section.
something that might have to be done annually, just like you do with setting your bushel limits.
That's something
you know-
CMAQ wants to recommend. You absolutely can.
You can't just go from zero and say, well, we're gonna have this amount of this, that, and the other, everybody's gonna get that much, and you only got 25 people going.
I don't know. I was not part of that process.
I think they have a presentation. Why don't we let VMRC do the presentation now and just move on?
What presentation are you referring
Alexa's
to?
presentation.
So, let me give a brief preview of how we're going to proceed from here. We are going to have a plan, an overarching plan, either the 2013 plan, or if someone on the committee wants to recommend an alternative. And we're gonna have the committee do this consensus process on this one plan. And that will bring to the front what concerns people have with this plan. If we have all threes, cool, we can all go home. Otherwise, we have slides for each topic. We have slides on what the quota is, and we have some data. Slides on how many licenses, who would be eligible via different methods. What other questions have to be considered as part of licensing? Areas, seasons. We have slides for all of those, and we can step through topic by topic, so we're not starting on one topic, and skipping around. You know, we want to make sure we get the committee's opinions, the committee's recommendations on each topic, so we can bring that to the commission and say, this is what CMAQ recommends. And so we'll know what to make from our staff recommendation. You know, if there's things we can't get to, we'd be missing out on the public process until we get the public comments in. And by that time, we already have a draft regulation. And so we would miss your opinions, the public's opinions. So that is the way we envisioned this meeting proceeding.
And-
We'll start with an overarching plan and then walk through step by step.
And to Tom's point, I'm only here to be a tool for you all to try to make it more focused and efficient, because it's a lot to get through. But I know that we don't want to spend the whole time talking about process. So, but let's hear from Chris.
I'll just say I support the process that you have introduced, because I, like Tom and a lot of others, I've been here for a very long time. Simply voting on this, I think, makes things much more black and white than they really are. I think we saw, even with the committee members during our last meeting, I think we saw with the public that there is a diversity of opinion on this issue. And I think the consensus building process that you've introduced tries to tease out some of those differences in opinion on this, and it doesn't make it as, it makes it very tough, I think, to vote on some of this in just an up or down way. So that's why I support the process.
That being said, I'm not, as a facilitator, it's not my role to silence folks who don't want to do this. So I'm gonna put two pathways out there. One is we would carry on with the presentation and we would just have discussion of each of the topics that we can get through. And we're gonna try to make sure all voices get to be in there. And if the CMAC wants to call for a vote at a point, just the usual process, I'll be here to just help carry the microphone, make sure that the queue is kept. That is a pathway. The other pathway is that we try this consensus building process, which I realize is new and probably feels inefficient, and certainly have heard a case that we don't need it. Okay?
Can I say one more thing? I'm an old man. These slides are real nice, but I'd like to look at something and then be able to continue looking at it while another subject is brought up. We used to get a whole bunch of papers to look at with all this stuff on. Now you change the slide, and I've either got to sit here and take a picture of this with my phone or try to write down or remember what was on the other slide. Is there any way we could overcome that?
I'd love to, but we were working on this up till about an hour ago.
I'll go print some.
Okay, so Shannon's gonna go print some and request for next time. Brooke?
So just for clarity, because to me it sounds like the main difference between our usual process that Tom is advocating for and the process that we're discussing now is that rather than voting yes or no, as you normally would, you can vote yes or no or yes but. And I think that a lot of people often want a yes but. And so I guess I just wanted to clarify, is there a bigger difference? Christina, is there a bigger difference? And I guess maybe Tom, is there a bigger difference that you're perceiving?
Go ahead, Tom.
He's gonna say yes, but.
No, what I'm going to say is, I look at a recommendation to open this fishery with some limit on the number of people that get into it. I don't know what that is. And conservation equivalency, because the state is obligated with their agreements with Maryland to do that, to come out as an option to take before the commission, which the commission will have to consider after getting public input that includes, this table contains a lot of people that are interested, have a strong feeling about getting the crab dredge fishery open, but it would also include the crab potters that are like Doug Jenkins over here, who are against the concept because it'll take quota away from the crab pot fishery, which is many more people than the 20 or 30 we're talking about here. And so let's just move forward with getting a structure for this new regulation in place, and then deal with the issue of what's gonna happen with the quota transfer, or not quota transfer, the conservation equivalency, so that we can move forward.
Okay, how about this? I think you all understand the concept of the 3-2-1. Tom, you are definitely moving us into proposal, into structuring the recommendation.
I don't know what use it does to do anything but that.
So why don't we move into that? Let's move into the proposal, and if at the point that we are trying to see where the whole room is at, folks can say, let's vote, or they can say, you know, I really would like to know if there are some yes buts. I would like to know and draw out some more voices, and you can request that at the time.
I mean, I don't need the microphone. I mean,
It's
you're
for,
professional at doing what you do. Most of these are professionals at crabbing, harvesting, and I'd rather go with your process because you have a process that obviously the commissioner has endorsed, has taken the time to make this happen. And I think it's we owe him, the commissioner, and your opportunity to make this happen for us.
Thank you, Ed. And we're just using the microphone for the benefit of people listening in. Let's try. Let's try to move forward into dialogue, and let's maybe see how the 3-2-1 goes at a point, and we can throw it out. if it's not helping. I do, Tom, I want you to know that I do respect your concerns, okay? So we wanted to ask, and it sounds like, Tom, you might have this, but I am curious how many people around the table, because you did receive the topics in advance, maybe came today with a proposal, with a recommendation that you'd like to put before the committee.
Otherwise,
Did folks do that?
Otherwise, we can start with the 2013 plan.
Right, so we're looking for a starting point, and this would be a starting point for voting or for consensus building. Spencer, you had mentioned one last time.
Yes.
Okay.
I still have the same one.
You still have the same one. So if you could slowly tease out the elements of it, and to your point, Peter, I'm gonna try to write up the key elements as they come out.
I'm also going to be putting them up on a slide, so I may ask you to repeat things.
It says to open crab dredging fishery from January 1st through February 28th for maximum allowable harvest of 1.5 million pounds of blue crabs, utilizing all of the 2013 staff proposal for a limited entry fishery as provided by staff to the commission on October of 2013, with discretion granted to the commissioner or his designee for blue crab management. The final determination of the limited entry criteria and deadlines after consultation with CMAQ. This includes a provision that no other crab fisheries in Virginia are penalized in 2024, and all crab fisheries and user groups in Virginia are equally and equitably managed for any harvest increase or reduction in all future years.
Okay, so we need to pull out those elements again to make sure it's crystal clear for everyone. So Alexa, you captured it?
Is there anything you disagree with on anything on this slide that I missed you saying, missed you addressing?
Where is the 37 participants coming from?
The 2013 plan.
Ah, okay. But it would be eligible for them. It would be eligible for those 37?
I'm sorry?
So let me ask it differently. It's only those 37 individuals with no transfer.
Correct. So there may be only 20 people participating, because it would only be the 37 participants who participated in all of the last 5 dredge seasons who would be eligible.
Okay.
I would have a friendly addition to you. The friendly addition, and again, is that staff come up with a lower number, that if the participation is below that number, and I mean real participation, not just somebody buying a license so they have it because they can sell it.
Agreed.
That they put a lower limit where they start opening it up to some type of application with qualifications, type of lottery, and that those qualifications somehow make it so that it is full-time watermen who are first on the list, not some part-time 30-day crab potter a year type of person.
Spencer, are
Or
you
30
good
day
with that?
acting as a commercial waterman.
Or do you want to elaborate?
I'm good with him, and I think you said non-transferable.
Yes, this needs to be non-transferable.
Yes.
I would agree with the non-transferable license, except for, family or death or something like that.
That's right.
Yes, but you can't just get it, you can't get that license and sell it versus, our shrimp fishery. You have to have 500 pounds of landings within 2 years to keep your license. If you don't have any landings, if you do get a license for dredging, if you don't have any landings, I would personally say in a year, because I would say you're not committed to it, then you lose it.
They need to be verified that they're out there by the DMRC or something. There's a whole lot of people with crab pot licenses right now. There's a bunch of pounds that we're getting close to the threshold, but they're not even, there's people, the whole reason we have so many pounds caught now is because of all the people writing in that they're catching crabs and stuff to keep their license, because we got this use it or lose it mentality. So if you're gonna have the crab dredge thing, which is the same reason why you had the people, everybody's gonna say they're gonna do it because they think they're gonna get some money for the license or something like that.
And that's-
It needs to be verified when they go out and do it, that they're actually out there, not just writing in. Because you have a lot of people holding crab pot licenses and all this other stuff that were sitting somewhere, a report from an office catching the same amount of crabs that people are out there actually catching. It's ghost reporting, and
I agree.
that's why, that's half the reason we're in the pickle we're in now.
All right, so, can I make a clarification?
Yep.
Are we adding the new people enter under a certain amount that Tom suggested?
Not, in my opinion, from the beginning, no, but if the fishery was viable and it was something that we were gonna keep, if it's like Tom said, if it got to a certain number, make some qualifications for new people to get into it, because myself probably being the youngest one in it, none of us are getting any younger. And it should be, eventually, you should be able to bring new people in it. That's the only way that the fishery would keep going.
Okay, so, you know, the reason I'm asking you this is because this is your proposal
Yes, ma'am.
that we're going to do the consensus on. Once we get to our licensing section, we can have these bigger conversations that aren't part of this. You know, you can say you're a 2 or a 1 on this proposal, say I would like to talk more about letting new people enter the fishery, and then we will get to that in its turn. So this is
Okay,
Uh,
so that's
this
what we
is-
have currently?
what we have for your plan right now. There's a few other slides that contain,
Is that the plan that Spencer articulated?
Can we get rid of the bushel tag? I hate tags.
We can't do that this year.
Rom, you had a
Just a
point?
quick clarification, the first slide said no conservation equivalency in 2024.
All right, that's just 1 year.
I've got
Huh?
a few.
And that's just for 2024, no conservation measurements.
That is what Spencer said.
Right, but the dredge fishery is gonna operate 2024, 2025, so any kind of
It
equivalency.
wouldn't- The dredge fishery wouldn't come in until January 25.
Well, this, right, but I'm saying
So
that
you would
the
still-
equivalency would be in 2025.
That's right.
So you just need to change
So
that.
did you mean to say that no conservation equivalency in 2025?
Right.
Yes, sir.
Okay, great.
26.
Good catch.
So what you're suggesting is that you fully prosecute this fishery in 2025, and then when we do our summer regulatory changes, which we do every summer,
See where we stand.
then we would apply a conservation equivalency, because like we do, like they do with the recreational Black Sea Bass opening February deal, because then you'll know what you're making a conservation equivalency for, you won't be guessing.
Well, we could make, in my opinion, make conservation equivalency if needed at that time. They might have, come back with a huge, winter dredge survey and there's no need for.
I'm not counting on that.
Okay, so it sounded like there were maybe a few other elements to add, Alexa, the issue of verifying?
So just for the purpose of the committee discussing, doing consensus on this plan, it also includes this area on the right, that green shape. It includes whelk and horseshoe crab bycatch allowed with valid permit, so that would be if you have a horseshoe crab dredge permit or whelk permit, and the other measures here. These were all in the 2013 plan, so those are also encompassed in Spencer's recommendation.
Not all that, but
Okay, so let's add a couple elements to the first slide, and then we'll walk through it again, and then let's see where the whole room is at with this, okay? So I had heard from Kenneth the issue of verifying the licenses. Can we capture that?
I mean, unless we have people meeting everyone at the dock, there's not really a way for us to.
Just because it was brought out in
You
this
need to see them at least
discussion.
one time. I mean, the
Yeah, if
VMRC,
you have
they
a-
got 1 million boats. They ought to be able to verify the person's out there. I mean, it's not like it's gonna be 700 people.
Yeah,
If
if
you
you have
can
a
determine
small
20-some boats is out there, you might need, we got a bigger problem to address than that.
We could include a hail in, hail out.
let's just capture it for the consent, for the exercise now, because then we can see where everyone is at. And then, this conservation equivalency conversation that just happened in the corner, were you all saying that after 2025, based on the data that would emerge, maybe that could be introduced depending on the numbers?
What I suggested was we do a new set of regulations, or we make adjustments to the regulations in June.
Yes.
In June. By June, they will know what the harvest was in January. That's when we make adjustments for the next June to June, or July to June, whatever it is, timeframe.
Okay.
So yes, there would, in my opinion, there should be conservation equivalency, but that's when it gets applied.
Okay.
Now, one could debate whether there should or shouldn't be conservation equivalency, but I think it would be better to do that after we know, oh, look, only 10 people went out, they only harvested 250,000 pounds, we're fine. Or, on the other hand, they could say it loaded up, they caught 1.5 million pounds, the total allowed amount. We need to do something.
Okay, so Alexa, can you capture that nuance in the bullet under conservation equivalency? And then let's see where the whole room is at with this proposal. We're gonna walk through it once she's made that modification. Okay, and so Alexa, it's a couple different slides that encompass it, is that right?
Yes, so there's this, there's the 2013 area, the 2013 plan, and then all of these measures that were also in the 2013 plan, which you had recommended.
All right, is this all very clear to people so that we can see where the room is at? Do you have a question, Spencer?
Yes. Can we cut out the no dollars part and make sure that it is, done to 5 days a week, Monday through Friday?
It is in it.
That's already
That's
there.
already- That's in code and regulation.
Code and regulation, ban Saturday and Sunday.
Can we just cut the no dollars part out there?
Yeah, I agree, because the divers is only gonna impact you if you don't haul bottom.
Yeah.
It's gonna have any impact on the bottom. It shouldn't even be in there.
Matt, yeah, but Pat said that he couldn't, if it did get that far, he couldn't have this year anyway. But yes.
Okay, so does anyone who hasn't been speaking have just, not opinions, but questions, just questions about it? Marshall?
Here. I ain't got my glasses, I don't see that well. What is this?
That's
I will
the
be-
conservation equivalency.
I will be explaining that slide when we get to it.
Well, no, it looks like you made that, I don't see that well, but it looks like it gets.
It's gonna be
1.5 million
much-
pounds crab dredging with crab pot, it's early.
It's gonna be much larger on the screen. I will be discussing that when we get to it.
Let me just ask you a question, does that say crab pot starts, it ends earlier if it's just 1.5 million pounds crab dredging?
Yes, all of those options will end the season early.
So, pay attention here.
Can I make a suggestion, please? All right, we gave this out to you because you wanted a copy of it. Now you're all going through it and you're jumping ahead of the game. So just concentrate on what we're doing now. We're going to get to those things. Because everyone's looking ahead into this report right now.
We need to know the facts.
You'll know when we get to it, okay? Because everyone's jumping ahead. Try to stick with this, get to this slide, go to the next one, and we'll go to the next one, and we'll move on that way. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, folks, I just want to acknowledge it is really complicated. We are asking to see where people are at on things that they don't have all the information. These things interconnect. I just want to remind folks, we're not taking a binding vote right now. We want to see if a lot of people have too many questions or concerns about conservation equivalency, you'll be able to let us know in a second. And then we can know, okay, we got to talk about that. Chris?
Just a very quick question. Before we start testing for consensus on any proposal, do we want to put other proposals on the board as well? Or do we want to deal with this one and then go to other ones?
This is just a start to discussion.
Okay, that's just,
Yeah.
I wanted to make sure we were.
I don't think this
Nope.
is gonna be the end. This is the starting point. We're gonna see where we're at. And it may be that the CMAQ ends up having a bunch of different things that they recommend be considered, right? But let's look at Spencer's proposal that encompasses part of the 2013 plan. I'm gonna ask Tom to give some grace just to experiment with this process, because the option is to put, I really love this plan, I'm all in, I fully support it, I don't need to talk about it anymore. That would be 3 fingers. 2 fingers is like, this plan is fine, I'm happy with this plan, I would support it. I do have some questions and concerns, but you know, we don't have to talk about those. 1 finger, I couldn't support this plan. I have questions and concerns, we need to talk about them. So it gives folks a chance to give a little more visual information to the room. Okay, so let's see where folks are at with this plan. And if you don't want to do 3, 2, 1, just raise your hand if you like it, keep your hand down if you don't. But let's, if I could have staff help me count.
Are we talking
So-
about just this plan, or are we talking about where you got the bushel limits if we caught 1.5 million pounds and all that stuff?
We're talking about just this plan, and again, we're not voting, we're saying,
We don't know the whole story.
I'm fine with this plan, or I have too many questions and concerns. This is to help us understand what we have to talk about. It might be, we want to spend the rest of the day talking about conservation equivalency, but we want to know what are the other issues that really need to be focused on, okay? So this proposal that's on the screen, that she toggled through a few slides, are you a 3, 2, 1, or you can put your hand up or leave it down if you object to it? Okay, so we have, how many ones? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So 10 people. How many 2s were there? There were 1, 2, 2 3s, and 1, 2. Okay, so see how it's useful to know that the plan is currently stated. So, go ahead, Tom.
Not that the plan is currently stated is unacceptable or not good or whatever. We don't know what the other options are that we're supposed to be considering. Please, Alexa, present.
Well, Alexa has a series of slides that ask for your recommendations. So,
And we're gonna be taking it, again, item by item. So I'm not gonna run through all of my slides and then backtrack. It's gonna be item by item.
okay, so we clearly at least need a lot more information, or there are a lot of objections to that plan. We could go to each person and say, you know, is it that you need more information, or do you object to a key element? I would recommend, it would be useful to know that. Corey?
We need more information. I understand y'all don't want us jumping ahead, but you handed this to us, and this, I understand, this conservation equivalency, this right here, this chart, that's a game changer for all of us on the decision making. Every one of us here is gonna make a different decision than what we would without a conservation equivalency. So
Let's just
if
go
we
straight
want,
to
if we
that.
wanna go to, yeah, I think we should do that, because if we're gonna go to a plan, we need to go through that.
It's very hard to make a decision if you don't have all the information in front of you. It just adds to
Tell
much-
them that.
Also, just to clarify, CMAQ can recommend against conservation equivalency. Okay, that is an option.
But what we need is, staff is recommending conservation equivalency. What conservation equivalency looks like, we can really use your input on. So let me show you what we've got. So on the left, we've got your baseline, and then we gave, for example, if quota was set at 1.5 million pounds, here's a few options that we calculated would result in a reduction of 1.5 million pounds. The column on the far right is 1 million pounds, but these aren't your only options. The CMAQ could recommend 1.2 million pounds. We'd analyze accordingly. You could recommend 800,000 pounds. We would calculate accordingly. So each row is a different sort of set of options. So the first row is using the current bushel limits. You've got the season start, which is at low bushel limit, when the high bushel limit starts, which runs until when the low bushel limit starts, and then the season ends. The second row we reduced the low bushel limit. So right now, the low bushel limit is about 22% lower than the high bushel limit. This new low bushel limit is 30% lower than the high bushel limit. We have an option where we'd reduce, in addition to reducing that low bushel limit, we now reduce the high bushel limit 10% from the current bushel limits. And we did write out what those bushel limits would be for each of the categories. And then threw in an option of low bushel limits throughout the year.
Wow.
These aren't things we're specifically proposing. We're just giving you options that show you, if we looked at this, what would happen. So, staff recommendation will be very close to CMAQ's recommendations overall, with input from VIMS as well, but it will also include conservation equivalency for whatever options are chosen elsewhere. So like once we get to the quota section, what quota you pick will shape what these options look like. Now you'll notice, yes, each of these has the season ending early, because we really don't get a lot of bang for our buck from changing the low bushel limits. As we've presented to you guys before, during summer, only 88% of people fall close to their bushel limit. Most people, 88% of harvesters in summer are well below their bushel limit. So changing the high bushel limit to a low bushel limit doesn't get us a lot. What gets us a lot is closing days. Now, I tried to change the bushel limits in order to keep as many days open. That's why I have that low bushel limit only throughout the whole year. So you can see, even if we totally got rid of the high bushel limits, we would still have to close the season a few weeks early. You can also see the difference between 1.5 million pounds and 1 million pounds is generally the pot fishery would get about a week back. We want to present another way of looking at this. Some people are more visual. So each line is going to be an option. Right now we're just showing status quo. So the season starts March 17th, and then it runs using the light blue are the current low bushel limits. The dark blue is the current high bushel limit, and then again to the low into December. That is 2024. So this is each of the options we just showed for 1.5 million pounds and then for 1 million pounds. The light purple is that reduced low bushel limit. So sometimes that's paired with the current high bushel limit. In two of those options, that's paired with dark purple, which is that reduced high bushel limit. So these are all of the options if you kind of like looking at it like a calendar. That last column shows you, it goes into November and what date in November each of those would end. Last two columns show you how many days have converted from a high bushel limit to a low bushel limit and how many days additional are closed. And again, these are not final options. If you guys want to say we like this option, you're more than welcome to. But what I'm really looking for is we prefer more open days with lower bushel limits. So we prefer current bushel limits, but to lose a few days. Tell us how to shape. Because even if you picked a certain option, staff pulled this together fairly quickly. If you pick one, we're probably gonna go back and try min-maxing a little bit to make sure we squeeze every drop out for the fishery to be open. whether it's we, push the high bushel limit forward a little bit, if that's the committee's preference, in order to get a few more days open. I'm gonna try what I can. But these are the current options we have showing. Now, any questions about these options before we move into what decision points?
All this only affects full-time crabbers. You just did nothing for the part-timers or or none of the people, basically they're using agents and stuff like that. This only affects somebody that would be crabbing the whole time. I mean, bushel limits are one thing, but just a season closure for over a month, I mean, that's when we actually get really good money for them. I mean, that's pretty much pointless. I mean, that's not a very good time to close. I mean, then.
I'll also remind you that the days closed exceeds a month in most cases. That is because this year we did push into December.
Yeah.
So the standard is until 11:30, in which case it would be less than a month production. Just wanted to clarify for everyone where the baseline was.
Yeah, well, everybody's, we've all done good with the season extension and stuff. Like I said, it's just, I don't know why everything we do here only goes at the full-time people. We do nothing to stop the part-timers or the people that just come and go and stuff like that. It's almost like we're managing the fishery to make it more of a hobbyist activity than a full-time occupation with the way decisions we're making lately. We got the river open till 12 hours a day, till dark. I mean, we're doing everything we can to hurt the full-time people as far as I'm concerned.
If you have recommendations for other cost-saving measures, we would love to hear them. We can do the analysis.
You should put something together with whatever bushel limits or whatever it would take to keep it open. I mean, you shouldn't close the season. I mean, the whole point of doing dredging is so that we have continuity of supply. So we're gonna close out for a month and then open up with dredging. That'll do well when you come in the first day with a pile of crabs on the market. You'll hit it good that day.
So even if we
It'll set the stage in good
eliminate
shape.
the high bushel limits, we still have to close about 2 weeks early. If you want to recommend, the committee wants to recommend having a bushel limit low enough to allow a year-round fishery, we can try to do that.
Man,
I don't know what those
Wasn't that
bushel
the
limits.
whole point in doing crab dredging was to gotta get a whole year-round fishery, and now we're cutting time? I mean, that
Do you know how long it took us to get that extension on crab pot? Years we were trying to get that.
And now we're getting it up for
that's, I mean,
probably
that's,
20 people.
if you're trying to get continuity of supply, season closures should be off the board.
Sounds to me like we should forget about crab dredging and just try to do something crab pot. I don't see how 20 people, to me, this is ridiculous.
I mean, I don't see how 20 people are really gonna make that big of a difference out there anyway, to be something
Well,
that drastic. You try to cut 700 people.
It's gonna
over a
affect
month.
774 people really overall.
Well, I understand, but how is what 20 people do gonna affect 770 out there?
I don't know, it's gonna
After
close
being out
you
there,
down.
that just doesn't make sense to me.
It's gonna close you down early. This plan to me, you really need to look at it and think about what's gonna happen in the reality of things.
And again, these are the 1.5 and 1 million pound examples. If the committee wanted to say 500,000 pounds, 800,000 pounds, the options would look different.
But the committee can also say no equivalency.
But
They
there's
can?
going to be equivalency any way you look at it. He's already said that numerous times.
For-
And according to
No, just me.
Code of Virginia.
There'll be staff recommendation in other agencies. IMS is recommending conservation equivalency, NOAA is recommending conservation.
Everybody is.
What scares me to death on that is the sanctuary. Me and Ron fought like dogs and cats on the sanctuary. And what scares me is I heard this little rumor about making it year-round. We need to think about that. You close that sanctuary year-round, you kill us.
What we were talking about with sanctuaries is we may be able to make changes to the sanctuaries that would reduce the season and bushel limit changes. So for example, what Ram had mentioned was we could make the historical sanctuary year-round, or we could move the dates forward a week or something. We just don't have those numbers to know what that effect would be. But if the
Sanctuary smaller.
But if the committee wanted to recommend, please include sanctuary
Yeah.
changes, we might not be able to do it this
For
year,
years and years.
but staff can work on those analyses, and then, there would be less effect on the bushel limits and seasons. If there were other recommendations for conservation equivalency that we can use in partnership, we'd be all open to those too.
I got one question. We're talking about bushel limits on all crabs or females?
All crabs.
All crabs. Now, we've got a fishery that we're talking about opening that's gonna be 96% females. But we have to take a beating on male crabs?
Well, that is a
in an
concern.
equivalent- in a potential equivalency?
That is a concern. We'd be catching a lot more females than we'd be saving during the year. If you want us to increase our savings on females, we can. It's gonna look a lot bigger than what I've got up right now.
So,
Well, you know, we've got another fishery that's not the size as it used to be. Mr. Burns will not appreciate what I'm saying, but the crab shedders have never taken a beating on any of this stuff, and all they catch, or mostly, their big catches are on females. I'm not saying they have to, but this whole thing gets lopsided.
So I will say we
You know, when you're
reduced
talking about
this,
bushel limits on all crabs to protect females.
we did reduce the season on all other gears, which included peeler pots in 2022, 2021. And while we did expand things later for the hard crab potters, we did not further expand things for all other gears.
See, way before your time, we took a beating on hard crab pot things, and they increased the number of peeler pot licenses. It's been several years ago. They didn't touch that. And like I said at the last meeting, when we were discussing closing dredging, I can't remember the biologist's name, Rob might know, but we had a fellow from NIMS get up and said, you know, you people you have a fishery that essentially has 3 spigots running. 2 of them wide open, which was peeler potting and crab potting, and one of them is just dripping, and that's dredging, and you're gonna shut the dredging off and think you're gonna have a beneficial effect. And we got that jump for 1 season, why, I don't know, and then poof, it went right on back down after that. So closing dredging had very little effect on any of this. And we're having all this big discussion about bushel limits on all kinds of crabs for year round, when all we're doing is talking about catching females.
We could talk about bushel limits for peeler pots.
So, we have 2 levels of recommendation that CMAC is invited to make today. One would be your recommendation around conservation equivalency, and that could include don't do it, right? So I'd be curious if anyone wants to propose a recommendation. The other, we've heard that staff intends to include conservation equivalency, but really wants input on things like number of days or the timeline or the bushel limits, the things that are of relatively most importance.
What's the area?
To you.
What's the area? Is that the area it's gonna be in this little area
So,
we got here?
I know that folks have been kind of spoken over because we're not using the queue right now, but I know we're trying to process this. But I want to go to Chris because he hasn't spoken for a while.
I'll just say, because you asked about conservation equivalency, I think it's really important to remember this is a shared resource. We have 3 different management jurisdictions who are trying to share in this resource. We have generally maintained conservation equivalency since 2012, right, when we introduced 34%. I think Virginia is going out on a ledge all by ourselves and very much could disrupt this joint management program that we all are a part of now if we were to make a vote to not go with conservation equivalency for this. And like I say, I'm not saying it's been perfect, but I think it is the thing. If you look at the chart here, we do have a higher population than we did in the mid-90s to 2005. We have seen benefit from our management actions, and I think for us to simply go it alone and say, we're not going to do conservation equivalency, I think really is disrupting the balance of a shared resource within Chesapeake Bay and its tributaries.
I got kind of a thing towards what Chris said. We're talking about a shared resource, but Potomac River just shared to increase their bushel limits for, November, October and November this year more than they have been. So, I mean, there is kind of a way that everybody's going towards a little bit more of an increased harvest.
Well, and we also extended our season and increased our fall bushel limits last year, where the other jurisdictions didn't. So we can't really measure one against the other.
I know Rom has something, and I really would love to know whether anyone might have a recommendation.
Just wanted to ask the crabbers, what would you think of as the equivalency of prohibiting sponge crabs at certain times? Because that would be a direct one.
You got the dark sponge crabs, don't have that.
Oh, dark, I'm talking about all sponges.
That's gonna show everybody up the trees of the rivers to catch all the immature crab. You can't do that. That's what the sanctuary already did.
Okay, I'm just
saying,
posing.
that'll push everybody further, you already did that when you made the whole land sanctuary.
Just tossing an idea out there.
I got a question.
Can we go to, we have a few other people, and then I'll come back to you, okay, Spencer?
Put your name tag up to make sure you're in line.
Nathan Reynolds, Cape Charles, Virginia. I've got a question for Ron regarding juvenile crabs. It's been mentioned before, 60 or 70% are missed in the trawl surveys because we're not able to do it, right? And I want to clarify something, that the juvenile crab population does go into the number in which exploitation rate is calculated, correct?
It does, yeah, it does. What we do, it depends on what stage. So for females, anything bigger than 60 millimeters, 2.5 inches, that goes into the calculation of the spawning stock. But in terms of exploitation rate, yes, it's all crabs, and it's augmented by that 60%.
Yes, sir. So is it fair to say that the juvenile crab count can wildly skew the exploitation rate every year that we have, based on the fact that 60%, upwards of 60% is openly admitted by them as being missed? Is it fair to say that the exploitation rate of 34%, or annually as the target we don't want to go over, can be wildly out of place?
The one that we measure can vary because of the juvenile.
Right.
Yeah.
That's what I'm getting at, is that the exploitation rate is completely controlled by a juvenile number that is not known, and it's missed upwards of 60 to 70% openly admitted.
Well, I would say it's known in a relative sense, and it's going to be influenced, yeah, significantly by the numbers of juveniles that are out there.
Right. So we're making decisions on fictitious numbers, basically, because as a whole, if we can all agree to disagree or whatever, but what I'm getting at is, if we know a number is out of place, and we're calculating for juveniles upwards of 60% being missed, and we're basing all of our decisions on the exploitation rate of the females, and our harvests are based on how many females that we harvest based on the area and so on and so forth, how can we make a sound decision on crab dredging and what we do in a small percentage of the realm, like Mr. Nixon was saying, and we're gonna cut that trickle off when we don't have a real number?
Well, okay, so remember that the decisions are made based on several, exploitation rate is one of them, and that hasn't been a problem. The other one, that when we measure the overfished or abundance, the other one's the abundance, and that is not influenced. That we feel we have a pretty good handle on.
Okay.
We're comfortable with that. We also use trawl survey data that measures the spawning stock in the spawning ground during the summertime, right? And then there are other surveys. So those to me are the key ones, that the fact that we are measuring abundance during the winter of the females that are either going to reproduce, that year, and also on the trawl survey abundance. And both of those are showing the same thing. So I agree with you that that exploitation rate is going to be influenced quite a bit, but that's not the only driver. As I said, that's not the one that's been problematic.
So.
I would like to add, what we're looking for from the committee today isn't do we dredge or do we not dredge? Because regardless of that decision, which the commission will make, we need a framework for what a dredge fishery will look like should it be opened. It is 5:40, and we have not yet done a consensus on any of the management measures. We still have quotas, licensing, season, area, gear, transferability.
We got Plan A.
So, and there might be elements of Plan A that the group largely agrees on, but as it was currently stated, most people had strong concerns. And so as we have the subsequent conversations, again, really asking people to be in that solution-oriented mindset. We don't have time to air all the concerns and arrive at meaningful recommendations tonight. So let's think about, what would you propose?
The decision points we're recommending for conservation equivalency are up on the screen. Would the committee prefer more open days or higher bushel limits? Because we can lower bushel limits and allow more days open. And then would the committee like to consider sanctuary changes to dates, for example, in order to take fewer bushel limit and season reductions? The committee talking about this is something that will help staff craft options, whatever may come.
My question was for Ron, how much conservation is this sanctuary supposed to be for?
We haven't been able to calculate that yet.
I'd like to make a recommendation.
Okay, thank you.
Now, I am not gonna vote for crab dredging, and the reason being it affects way too many crab potters. The market value for the product is not there. There's too much product on the market that will override what we're gonna do. As far as a crab dredged crab, if somebody has a choice between a crab dredged crab and a pot caught crab, they're gonna go with pot caught crab. Fact. Beyond that, I'm gonna recommend a yearly, annual, however you wanna put it, crab pot fishery, crab when you want. And what that does, that naturally takes care of all these issues. Everyone can crab when they want. It doesn't affect anyone. There's no spigots running anywhere. Crab when you feel like you can, and we don't have to fight tooth and nail for a fishery that is only gonna really amount to 20 to 30 people, even if we open it up and say 50 people. Because I have the math based on 2016 trips, based on 744 average pounds per trip, with 50 crab dredgers. That's 40 trips that you can make in the 2 months, okay? And that's only with 50 people. That's not a blip on the radar for the crab potters that are still gonna be affected. Open up the crab pot industry, allow it to be crab when you want. If the water's right and you can do it, water temperature's up, February or March, you crab when you want. We can work out the bushel limits with staff. We can work on all that because we already know the amount of people that are in the fishery. We already have the licenses. We already have everything in place. It's just, at this point, it's an extension of the crab pot fishery. And we stay in that market for, what do we lose, a month and a half? North Carolina does something very similar. That's my recommendation.
Okay, so recommendation to open an annual crab pot fishery, crab when you want? Is that it in a nutshell?
Yes, ma'am. We can work out the finite details later.
Okay, do you wanna see where the room is at with that? Okay, so 3, 2, 1, or vote yes or no, if you object to 3, 2, 1.
Question?
I got a question before we go any further.
Yeah.
Say we closed the sponge crab, say you had a 2-week closure for the sponge crabs. How much would that benefit the crab population?
We'd have to get staff to calculate that. We don't have the numbers, they have the numbers.
I think he's asking, how would it benefit the population itself?
Yeah, how would it?
It would produce more eggs.
Yeah, okay, you have more crabs spawning.
Just for 2 weeks.
There'd be that many more eggs.
So Ron, if something like that were to happen, when? So in June. End of May and June.
Yeah.
If you were to pick 2 weeks, what would it be?
You have to figure out reported in this.
How many sponge crabs you have, and how many eggs they have, and
Right.
you'd have to put in some kind of production models.
Is this discussion related
No, I
to
think it's more to do
Nathan's
with how many crabs you have.
proposal? Okay, let's,
Just a clarification, does that proposal include not reopening the winter dredge? So you wouldn't do, right?
No winter dredge fishery.
okay, so
talking
Nathan's,
about peanuts.
let's focus back to Nathan's recommendation, everyone.
I can't hear what you're saying, dear, what you saying?
Let's focus back to Nathan's recommendation and get through that, and then we can move to a different one.
Recommendation, not a motion, correct?
Just
Right.
recommendation.
We're seeing where the room is at, we're seeing whether we wanna keep talking about this, okay? So Nathan's recommendation is annual crab pot fishery, crab when you want, which would necessitate closure of the winter dredge, is that right, Nathan?
Yes.
Includes.
Which would include, thank you, Tom. Okay, so let's see where CMAC is at with this. Okay, we have 3, 2, 1, how many?
What's it again?
Curious whether anyone is, okay, it looks like a lot of objections to this. Yeah,
Go back to 1, 2, 3.
okay. You can do yes or, basically 2 allows you to say, I do have some questions and concerns, but I would support it. It gives you another option, it allows for some nuance.
I have to say, you were surprising me, Marshall. I have to say, you were surprising me voting against the year-round crab holiday.
Okay,
Can you just ask for hands?
well, we can just ask for hands.
I have a friendly amendment.
It's not an amendment.
To the proposal?
Friendly question about it. Would you be amenable to the concept of closing in January so that enforcement can get abandoned pots out, or get people to deal with abandoned pots? That would be my only concern, but with a year-round.
Give me a check, I'll pick it all up.
Yeah, that's what I mean, well, they won't give you a check because you can't keep them, but you can
I
deal
don't, I
with
don't think anybody's gonna be crabbing.
Give me a steak.
All right, well, let's do yes or no. I think that's been the request of the group. Annual crab pot fishery, crab when you want. It includes closure of the winter dredge. Let's start with that. Yes or no? How many yeses? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. How many noes? 5.
I don't even understand what she was saying.
Hold up. Clarify it again.
Yeah, so
This would
Nathan
be
has,
a year-round crab pot fishery, so no season open, no season close. You can have your pots year-round, and there would be no winter dredge fishery.
But there would still have to be bushel limits that would likely change during the years.
Absolutely.
When are we gonna catch that many more? I mean, I don't see how it would affect the bushel limits that
You're
much.
talking about only adding
You're
another
not-
20,
You're not gonna
25
catch
days.
that many crabs in the end of December and the beginning of March, unless it's.
Yeah, well, no, just, but will come with.
I mean, I can understand, but I'm just saying it shouldn't change.
It shouldn't change.
okay.
Not too much.
Well, it sounds like the committee is pretty divided on this
Now,
recommendation.
let's take that count again, because he didn't understand it.
Okay,
Read his recommendation again.
to have a recommendation for an annual crab pot fishery where you can crab when you want, understanding that this would include closure of the winter dredge,
And annual is year-round.
year-round.
Be no crab dredge fishing.
3 is for and 1 is against.
Just be yes or no.
We're gonna simplify for y'all to just yes or no. So yeses again, we had 7 last time.
Yes, yes, again.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
I mean, the way the dredging plan's drawn up, I'm definitely yes. If you can only go in that little box, I don't see what good it is. It counts the whole day out pretty much. I mean,
That's 9.
Okay, so we have 9. How many no's? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 no's. So, you know, in a consensus building process, I'd want to hear what the no's have to say, and if there's anything about this proposal that could be strengthened from their perspective to address their concerns. Does this group want to do that? Do we want to build on this? Okay, and this is where maybe you're a no, but you don't have very serious concerns, so maybe we could hear from those first, if there are no's that feel like they could modify this relatively easily. something?
I'll just go because I'm quick here. Part of this is, I think we have seen very clearly tonight the complexity of changes in this fishery. And so I don't think we're gonna do anything quickly, is what it amounts to. My statement at the last meeting too was, I don't think we should be making major changes until after we get through the stock assessment. And so I think once we get through that process and we have a new target and a new threshold, we should be looking at options like this, yes. But I don't think it's something we should be looking at now.
Okay, so for you, if it was modified to say, after the stock assessment, let's revisit this idea, then you would be a yes?
Yes.
Okay. Does that what Chris said address anybody else's concerns who was a no?
I was a yes, but I would rather wait till after we know what's going on a little bit over the side.
Okay. So you were a yes, but you agree with him, Tom. Okay, others who were a no. Anything that would address your concerns with this idea? Or can you share more about what your concerns were?
Well, I just don't feel that by opening crab potting up for 3 months, December, January, and February, regardless what we do, an extension on the crab pot season in December, I don't think it's going to be such a minuscule amount of crabs that are caught that I think the dredge fishery would much better put more watermen back to work than that would support. I mean, we're talking, if we do go with 20 boats, we're talking 50 or 60 people going back to work. As far as the crab prices, other than the crab pot crabs out of the safe, there is market for dredge crabs. There's always been market for dredge crabs, whether it be picked crabs or whether it be basket crabs. I think that we definitely would. I think the people, the workers, and the state and the fishery would benefit more from the crab dredge fishery than they would from hard pot fishery for those months.
So it sounds like your objection is that the closure of the winter dredge.
No, they,
Or yeah. You want the dredge to be open. You would be concerned that this would require it to be closed.
You're not going to catch any crabs. I mean, maybe a few down in Lynn Haven or somewhere, but nobody, the percentage of crabs that's going to be caught in those 3 months from crab potting.
Okay. So are other folks who were a no, any objections that you could modify this proposal and it would work for you? It sounds like for you, not really, because it would close down the dredge again.
We used to have a year-round crab fishery. Potted, you could start whenever you wanted, all you had to do was buy your license, and at the same time, we had a dredge fishery. Now, according to the numbers that staff put on the email, talking about crabs being worthless, what'd you say you found out in Delaware? I'll call back up there again, $2.52 a pound.
That was based on Delaware data, and I did correct it. You were
That's
right.
$100 a bushel.
I had the wrong cell.
You're gonna give me 1,000 bushels?
Let me tell you what.
That's $100,000 if you can catch them.
Let me tell you what I paid last winter.
He's a crab buyer.
Let me tell you what I paid on Delaware dredge crabs. They got down as low as $35, and I was buying Louisiana, Florida, any other state that was potted. They were around $75, $80. They were easy to sell. Didn't even have to make a phone call. I had to beat the phone up to sell 50, 100 bushel of Delaware dredge crabs, $30, $35, $40. They wanted to open at 30, Lindy. We gave them 40. And the market accepted them. It was something new. It was a little lull between Virginia and, seasons opening, but as soon as everything got going down south and they knew the coast was clear, they just crushed it. And you couldn't even get, at the end of the season, they went conking. They didn't know what to do. They just like disbanded, and they couldn't catch any crabs. They weren't even overloading the market.
They still have a fishery up there though, Jeremy.
Yes, there's 14 boats working.
Well, that's all right.
I know, there's nothing wrong with it. It's just, they're not,
But
they lost
if we had
the
14
value.
or 15 boats here,
When I was buying.
it's not gonna, we don't need an equivalency.
When I was buying at the end of dry season, I bought to the last year, and it was viable. You had markets that were used to taking those crabs. Soon as we stopped,
Then
the
that was it.
South slowly bled in on us. Now, they got that in their mind. That's what they want. you're gonna have to fight against them to get back in there.
Right.
You're not gonna have the
Well,
value
this
that
is,
you
this is
think
one
you're
thing
gonna
I had on my
Okay.
list here to ask,
Thank
was
you.
how many buyers would be willing to participate in buying these crabs if we
Now,
don't have any market
yeah,
for it?
you'll have now, if you have a year that is deathly cold, okay, this coming year is a different year, El Nino, La Nina, whatever, go more, but this year seems like it's a little bit different. If you have a really, really cold winter, like the bay freezes over, or it gets so cold in the south that they can't crab, yeah, they'll take anything. They'll take them in teacups, they'll take in a pitcher of a crab. Okay, everybody in here that crabs knows that. But just like today, silk's $25. Didn't buy today. I didn't buy crabs today. I buy about 600 bushels a day. I laid them off today. I've only laid them off 2 times this year. It's the supply and the demand, and we lost our market shares. So it's going to be a hot mess when you come back in on it.
Right now,
They'll
it's-
sell,
right
but
now-
out
So-
of price.
Right now, it's the economy.
Thank you
Yes.
for that information, and we'll have more time for you to share more at the end. And we're hoping to still wrap up relatively soon in terms of our goal to wrap up at 6. So we've had one proposal, and we've had about 10 of you are okay with this proposal as long as it falls after the stock assessment, that it be something that's looked at then, to have closure of the winter dredge and a year-round crab pot fishery. So that's a recommendation around 10 of you support. Are there do we want to talk more about this, or are there other recommendations that you all want the MRC to hear and that you want to take to the board? Other things that you all want to propose?
If you have recommendations to help us make these conservation equivalency recommendations, we want to hear them. If not, we can move on to other topics.
So any recommendations around conservation equivalency?
And I do have the questions up on the screen for you to think about.
Can I ask maybe a clarifying question? I know we're trying to talk about conservation equivalency now, but the one proposal that we've had for a crab dredge fishery that was open this year was widely, we had 10 ones on that in this. Are we headed towards a recommendation that we just not have a crab dredge fishery this year and continue to chew on this?
Well, but what everyone was voting on was one particular plan. It could be that if a plan had a quota of 800,000 or of 25 people, there might be more people on board. So that's what we're going to be walking through with the next few topics. It might be they're not on board with this plan, but through the decision-making, we can come up with a plan that more people support. And then we can recommend that to the commission.
And this is where it's really helpful to understand which of the details do people object to. And so we can move on to the next thing, but I recognize that these topics all interconnect, right?
Do it.
So,
Let him have the mic. Do it.
do you have a proposal?
We can try this.
Okay.
So my proposal would be that no crab dredge fishery until after the stock assessment is complete. And we discussed all these different proposals.
Can you say that again?
So we don't make any management changes, except for what have already been made this year, until after the stock assessment. And we look at all these different options that we've discussed tonight.
There has to be one management change, but that would come through, and that would be that the commission would have to say the crab dredge fishery will be closed.
Right, well, that's, yeah, exactly.
Right now,
We can test out
So,
some other variants.
let me make sure.
When is the stock assessment expected to be completed?
2026 fishing season, right?
Okay.
Should be ready by fall 6.
Okay.
You
You have something on his proposal?
I'd like to make a friendly amendment to Chris's and say that we start
crab potting at March 1st with no conservation equivalency and the low bushel limit for those starting March 1st going through the 17th, if we're not gonna look into the crab dredge fishery as of now.
Just want to go to the end of December and start March 1st, test this year-round thing out, so we get some data on who would go. That way you know going forward what you're looking at.
All right, so it sounds like a two-part, a friendly amendment that is around the crab pot fishery.
March 1st to December 31st.
Yeah, I'll second that. I like that.
March 1st.
Eliminate the crab judging until we get the stock assessment.
Until we get the stock assessment, yes.
Crab judging.
Okay, so let me understand, see if I understand it. And folks, I know it's a lot, and I understand the need for side conversations, but I don't want you to miss out on the chance to weigh in on this, okay? Two-part proposal, linked proposal. The first part is that we not make any management changes until after the 2026 stock assessment. And we use the time to explore all the options that are beginning to come out.
What are the dates on this stock assessment? Say 2026, are they gonna do it in 2025 and then give us results?
End of,
The assessment will,
go ahead, Ron.
the assessment will be done late 2025, and then the full final report and presentation will be in early spring 26.
They'll have outside experts review once the draft is out, they'll have outside experts review, and then they'll submit a report, and that's when it becomes final. So that will be spring 2026.
That will give us time to discuss this, yeah.
Okay, so to get through again, and then we'll have clarifying questions about the proposal on the board. No management changes until after the stock assessment report, which is anticipated early spring 2026. Using the time to explore the options. And while in that same time period, waiting for the stock assessment, have March 1st to December 31st crab pot fishery pending that stock assessment. And I presume it's then revisited with that. So this two-part proposal, before we test and see where before we do yes or no, to see where people are at, clarifying questions about the proposal? Yes?
Cody, I like that you put that up there, but I'd rather, Corey, I'm sorry, I'd rather not have the dates. You know, maybe look at extending the pot season. Are you okay with that?
Why not? Why, if you don't mind me asking?
Because that puts us into a corner, that we have to do those dates. We may do it, might be able to go even earlier or a little later. Okay?
I don't like a little later.
We don't know.
So that's why I put those dates.
Okay.
I'd like to put
Well, but all
those dates
this-
as I recommend, as my motion.
Okay,
Yeah,
that's
all
fine.
this means is it's CMAC's recommendation.
Yeah, I mean, I like it. I think it's a good idea. I think this whole idea is,
Will staff support that? Will staff support that? That's the next thing.
Let's see, let's vote for our
Well,
test.
but I've been here a long time, and I've said this many times.
Okay.
He can verify.
I got you.
He's got 37, I got 30 years.
Yeah, I'm like Joe Biden. I
And we've
can't
been in
remember
jail,
shit.
yeah. But I've noticed many, many times, when this crab committee comes up with something, and staff agrees with it, and BIMS, we get it done. It's the problem is, a lot of times when the crab committee wants something, and staff, they don't like it, most of the time, they win.
Okay.
So that was my question. I'm interested, you know, does staff like it? Because if not, we're beating our heads against the wall. When I stand up in front of this commission and say, this is what we wanted, and they stand up and say, well, that's not what we want, I lose. Am I right, Pete?
Yeah.
You've been here like myself a long time. Well, if we work together, we get it done. If we pose, but they get paid.
I hear you, Marshall. So
Marshall,
let's hear from,
we've already been looking into this, but we had to put it on the back burner to get this, to do work on the dredge stuff. So we are already looking into
But
this.
it's important to me if you guys.
We are seriously looking into this.
okay, so it sounds like there is staff appetite for this. That was a great question. So let's see, how many people would be in favor of this? Yeses?
Are we voting on the two
Which
separate?
part? Yeah, I think
it's two
I think it's two separate.
Do you wanna do it as two
Yeah.
separate?
Yeah, I
Or
think,
is it
I think
amended?
A kind of precludes B, since changing the seasons would be a management change. I think the idea we're at now is B. I think that would cover maybe B with no crab dredge fishery. Would that cover A and B for the makers of the suggestion?
So you're saying.
I think there, yeah, I think there are two, I mean, B would still be a management change.
Yeah.
So I think they're two separate pieces to vote on.
And Chris, you put this one up first. Do you still want to see where people stand on this? Or
I
does
think
it
it's,
feel
I think it's
covered?
I think it's worthwhile to see where people stand on them separately, because I
On
think there
them
will be some
separately.
difference.
Okay, let's do that. Let's take them in turn. So the first proposal, let's see if you're a yes or a no, that there are no management changes until after the stock assessment report comes out in early spring 2026. During this time, CMAQ is exploring the options. Are you a yes?
Doesn't that negate B then?
No, there are two separate issues.
We're only talking about A right now.
But if you vote on A, if it's voted on and accepted, that means there's no B.
Yeah, there's no B if you
Right.
say yes.
That's why we're saying
Yeah.
it's two separate.
Two separate.
But again, it's not a vote, so
Right, it's
we're
a-
just looking for.
You might like both of them, and then we might
Right,
see
you
what
could
that
vote-
means.
You could actually vote.
Okay?
Do you like,
You
yes,
need
so
the
the question on the table, do you like the concept of waiting until the stock assessment is done before we make any major, which I think are year-round fishery, March first to December 31st is a major change. Before we do a major change to the fishery, that's question one. Question two is, if we were going to do a change to the fishery in the next year, do you support doing it March 1st to December 31st?
Okay, so let's take them each in turn, and then we might have to talk more about how they impact each other. But
I'm going to
Chris
get
has
some-
asked,
I'm going to get some water, but I'm no on both of them.
okay. Spencer's no on both of them. So how many yeses on the first one? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Are the
Hey, take one off.
Yeah.
5? How many noes? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
Does that include Spencer?
Yeah. And did anyone abstain, or might have been a 2 in the consensus process? No?
Yes on both.
You didn't vote?
Oh,
Okay.
but Marshall, we count you as a no.
Okay, all right. So but there were more no's than yeses on that one. Useful to know that. Let's look at B. B is that we have a crab pot fishery open March 1st to December 31st. And we operate that until it's revisited after the stock assessment report in early spring 2026. Almost said 2016.
But no dredge fishery.
With no dredge.
With no dredge fishery, yes.
And continuing to explore options for the dredge fishery.
Oh, so you're adding that, Alexa.
That's an addition that was not in the.
Yeah, that's, yeah.
So that's,
It was explicitly
Okay.
stated in the proposal, no dredge fishery.
I didn't say that. I mean, I said this until the stock assessment. Then we can revisit the dredge fishery that's what my proposal was.
So, let me see if Corey and I are on the same page. I think I can safely speak for staff when I'd say we'd love to have more time to talk about this, so we're not planning a dredge fishery in one meeting. So if we don't talk about the dredge fishery if we don't consider opening a dredge fishery until after the stock assessment, we can still be talking about it piece by piece and craft together a plan that, again, could be put into a regulation to open or close each year after the stock assessment. We'd have time, we'd have, your time, staff time, more meetings. We can keep exploring options, but we wouldn't open the dredge fishery until after the stock assessment. Does that go along with your? So continuing to explore options.
continuing to have dialogue and research about it?
but we're not opening the dredge fishery at least until after the stock assessment.
Question,
Yeah.
will we have conservation equivalencies when we implement this? Will somebody be paying a price for that?
For the crab pot fishery?
For the increase of the CS?
Okay, so there was a question, if we went with B, would that entail a conservation equivalencies, that somebody would be paying a price for that?
So we don't see a lot of harvest. We don't see a lot of harvest increase in December. We don't know about March because we've had 1 year of an open March, and March varies widely based on crab availability, based on temperature. But it could be that each year we make a decision based on that March fishery. You know, by later in the year, we might have those harvest numbers in, and if they're, you know, if they went wild, we could consider that's something we could talk about as the situation comes up. But if it's no one's fishing in early March because the temperatures haven't hit the right point yet, it'd kind of be a moot point.
We should at least try to go to December 31st this year. Right? That's what I'm saying.
That's something the commission could possibly consider.
Okay. Just rewriting this real quick so we can vote. Okay, so the proposal on the table has sort of 3 elements. March 1st to December 31st, crab pot fishery. That is in operation until the 2026, early spring 2026 report of the stock assessment. During that time, there's no dredge fishery. It could be revisited after that stock assessment, but in the meantime, CMAQ and staff can keep exploring what the options would be so that it's not so crunched if it comes to that. Any questions about this?
Well, what if these boys find some funding and they get them a new boat and they find some more crabs? We might be able to open a lot more up. He says that they need a new boat to count them, so. The ones that listen.
You've been saying that for years, though.
Well, they ain't got their boat yet, They ain't got their boat yet.
So Kenneth, are you getting at conditions might change and we might want to
Well, I
revisit
mean, like,
this?
he says that they're missing them, so if they get the boat and find them, then they might, all this might not matter, you might be able to do it all. I mean,
That's
he said
probably-
himself, He said they're missing 60 to 70% of them.
I think that's something that we probably wouldn't see shake out until the stock assessment is ready. Would you agree, Ron?
Questions for you, Ron?
Okay. Ron, would you agree that this wouldn't, what Kenneth is pointing to we wouldn't know until the stock assessment?
Right.
Okay. Does that
And just to clarify,
satisfy you?
the March 1st to December 31st, that would be, the first time would be in 2026?
No. No.
It would start sooner and be in place until at least the stock assessment is available, at which point we will revisit the dredge fishery.
Well, so it would end December 31st, but wouldn't you have to, would staff have to figure out what extra catch that's gonna be?
The December catch doesn't generally represent a lot. Like I said, in March, we would hopefully have harvest numbers in soon enough to figure out for the rest of the year if a reduction of a balance is required elsewhere. Again, we don't know, we won't know conditions in March. It varies widely. So that might be something we have to take year by year.
Yeah, that could change by more temperature.
Okay, so let's see where we're at with this proposal. So I'll read it one more time, then we'll see our yeses and our nos, and we'll hear what concerns the nos have, if there are any. Okay, proposal, starting in 2025, a March 1st to December 31st crab pot fishery that runs until the spring 2026 stock assessment report. During this time, there's no dredge fishery. It would be revisited at that same time after the stock assessment report. But CMAQ and staff could keep exploring options around a dredge fishery, like meetings like this. Okay, if you're a yes, hands up, please. 7 yeses. If you're a no, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This group remains voting in similar patterns. Okay, so of those who are no, maybe you have fundamental objections and you would really need to go back to the drawing board with this. But if you have more minor objections and this could be tweaked, can you let us know?
I think that we should hold off on opening it in March this year until after the stock assessment. But in December, which is a high-value, low-volume fishery.
Catch on March first for $120 or March 17th for $80.
But that's because that's when the season opens is March 17th, but if it opens March 1st, and it's a good year.
We've already done it one year. We made money on Seaside because we caught them early, but they were gone.
The good thing about starting early, if you're not catching them, you'll eat some crabs in the market and everybody won't be coming in there the first day with a boatload.
I'll say Maryland and everybody in 2 weeks.
Okay.
Jam it full.
Tom, does that,
That answers my question. I was wrong in that thought.
okay, does it change your vote?
Nope.
Okay.
I still think it's your way.
So I'm not against the March 1st to December 31st. What I'd like to see though is what the catch would be so that we're not augmenting the catch significantly.
So for you.
So you have to consider, sorry, the evil words, conservation.
Okay, you could just, the
across the
bushel
year.
limit's a little bit longer, might.
So I don't have them, I don't have data for every year. But this was a graph I had at last meeting of catch, that was catch per trip in some years where there was a season extension. So for example, in 2017, which is the dark blue line, we did open March 1st. It was about 400 pounds per trip, but catch per trip varied from 875 to 175 pounds per trip. I don't believe I have the overall March harvest, but this gives an idea of how it varies. And I think it's varied from maybe 500,000 pounds to, 1.5 maybe, or 2. It depends on the year.
Chris?
Maybe just a different set of concerns. Because at some point, I think kind of like Rom, I could live with this in the future. I think this coming year, the issue is, we already added 4 hours to the season. To Mr. Diggs's point, we're gonna have a lot of part-timers in the fishery this year that we haven't had in the past because of that. We had a down year on the winter dredge survey, and we also kept the season extension in as well. So again, I think with the right controls, that season's probably not a bad idea, but now's not the right time to do it.
Okay, so it sounds like both of you sort of have concerns around doing it immediately. Like more information is needed, but potentially would be open to it in the future. Or at least you, Chris.
Yes, for 2025.
Okay, so it sounds like Chris and Ron, would 2025 ease both of your concerns?
Depending on the details of what the
Depending on the
catch,
details, okay.
depending on what the catch is.
And the survey.
Okay. Any of the other no's want to modify this? See if it would. Okay. Time check. Where are we at with time, Melissa?
6:20.
6:20. Okay, so we have looked at several proposals so far today, and it seems like the group is really split on all of them.
That's normal.
And that's normal for this group. And I guess what that would mean is that it wouldn't be so much consensus-based recommendations, but just information about where the splits are and where this group is at with these ideas.
What were the numbers for and against? When you say split, that's only 50-50.
7 and 5. So, I mean, technically, if you're voting and majority carries, that idea would carry.
He didn't get a chance to vote.
Do you want to count this again?
You can just add one more to March first, December 31st.
To the yes?
To the yes?
Yes.
So it would be 8 and 5. Are there still 5 people who were no's? May I see the no's again, just to, 1, 2, 3, 4. There's 6 no's. Okay.
I do have a point of clarification for
Yep.
Christina and staff, because we've moved away from
From
the consensus discussion phase, which was why it was under that framework that Pat and Ram and myself were at the table to sort of have
Good point.
a piece of the discussion. Now that we've moved into a voting framework, is it appropriate to have us voting? I have not voted on anything, so I'm not in your numbers, but I do want to note that if we are recording this as a CMAC vote, then we probably ought not.
Yeah, we shouldn't record this as a CMAC vote. This has been all to this point surfacing what you all are thinking. But if you would like at this point, if CMAC would like to make a vote of its members, you can do that. So if someone would like to move to do that, to be able to record the votes for this or any of the other proposals.
I thought that's what we did.
Okay, but we have some people at the table who are not members of CMAC, but who are
We didn't do motion and second. It was.
Ram, Brooke.
I seconded it when he said it.
What the motion, then he had members.
So let's do it one last time, and maybe this will be where we move to wrap things up, but one last time with just CMAC members voting, okay? So voting on this proposal, starting in 2025, March 1st to December 31st, crab pot fishery open. That happens until the 2026 stock assessment. There's no dredge fishery while that's underway, and we keep exploring options. So just voting with the
But
CMAC.
I thought it starts this year, that it starts in December, goes to December 31st.
2020.
You wanted this year.
Yes, I would, December
And then
17th to
you
the
gotta have some
31st,
stuff
added
to
on
run
to
the
the
numbers
season,
with.
and
You
then
can't just pull
concurrently,
out the
March
sky.
1st to
You gotta know
December
who's gonna
31st.
go.
This year, yeah.
This year, okay.
So we'd have to extend the season.
Can I make a motion? Can I just go ahead and make a motion and say it out right here?
Yes, sure.
I'd like to make a motion, starting this year, 2024, our season is extended through December 31st, and starting 2025, our season is March 1st through December 31st for pod fishing industry. And come the 2026 stock assessment, we revisit the crab dredge fishery.
I'll second that.
So let's have the CMAC members.
You already got a second? No.
But so let me ask you, so the conservation equivalencies, we're gonna throw that out the window on this.
No, I think staff said they were gonna see what happened in March and make adjustments in the summer.
But you're talking about this year, so there's not gonna be any adjustment this year.
No, they're just talking about this year.
December staff has already said is minimal.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say.
Yeah, so here's our December harvest each year that we've had a December fishery.
If they were warming up to go, you just catch them 2 weeks earlier instead of.
And then these are, I
Can you
did
go back to that
find,
slide? I didn't catch that, I'm afraid.
Oh.
Yeah, thank you.
first column, that's overall harvest in December. What percentage of the annual harvest that represents, how many harvesters fished in December, and how many trips they took.
Corey, as part of your motion, are you wanting to include the pieces about the dredge fishery not being open and about continuing to explore options?
Until the stock, let's tell the stock assessment, yes.
Yeah,
Stock
okay.
assessment comes out, where we can do a drug fishery.
So essentially
Without
this,
concentration equivalents and all, yeah.
Do it all together.
all together this. Okay.
Well, he's seconded that, make sure he agrees with that.
Yeah, I'm fine, yeah, I agree.
Okay, so then, do you usually vote with hands?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's see the yeses of the CMAC members. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Are you, Spencer, hand up? Okay. 7, 8. Okay, so it's still 8 yeses. And the noes of only the CMAC members. 1, 2, 3, 4. 5. Okay. Okay.
In mine, I'd rather wait till the stock assessments before you just
your objections around timing?
Just the stock assessment, yeah.
Okay. All right, so you have more yeses for that proposal.
That's why we've always done.
Okay. Do folks want to wrap up from here, or do you want to look at other issues?
I'd like to hear if maybe the public got something to say.
Well, we're not gonna leave the public lurching. We're gonna wrap up and hear from the public. But is there anything else that this committee wants to talk about first? Alexa, do you have anything?
We had a beautiful presentation.
I told you last time you got a rough job, you did good.
Just wanted to be clear, that means we are recommending to the commission, we'll probably be recommending a regulation that only contains closing the winter dredge fishery. It'll be probably, I figure, probably look like a pertaining to crab dredging, and all it will say from now until post 2026 is the dredge fishery will remain closed. It won't have any structure because we haven't heard any recommendations from you. So just want to make clear that that is what will be going forward to the commission.
And staff agrees with that, with the recommendations of the craft committee.
So we're not
Staff agrees with what?
So what about what we just did?
Yeah, what is, does that mean
Go in
that
front of the
the?
commission and say,
I can't say for certain
Pertaining
statements,
only to
but
the dredge
you know,
part.
We take that into
What
account.
about the other
But
thing?
we were directed at the last commission meeting to look into a dredge fishery, so.
I thought it was to look into a year-round fishery.
I think
So
we're
last
a dredge
time,
fishery.
a year-round
So-
thing was said last
So
time.
we're gonna have to go, go back and find out, maybe I should have talked to council as well, as to what this is.
Well, it would
So
look
this-
exactly like the old regulation.
Yeah, that's what's gonna end up
The old
happening.
regulation that was appealed
Yeah.
essentially said either open or close, because they appealed the entire regulation, and is now by code
We
open.
have to create a new
So
regulation
the
to-
modifications that you guys have, that you would want the March first to December 31st
That's a-
fishery open, that would go into 270.
That's an entirely different
Right.
regulation.
That's the
And that's what
regulation
we'll be,
already exists.
that's what we
So
will be
we'll
telling the
have to
commission.
build a new regulation closing the dredge. But we have no other recommendations to add to that regulation.
Can,
is what we
can
wanna
the piece
clarify.
around continuing to explore, can that be added or?
That's not
So
regulatory.
we're going to tell the commission, this is what happened at the CMAC meeting. They voted that they would prefer a March 1st to December 31st crab pot fishery. We can open 270 in October if that is
Okay.
what the
that-
commission wants.
That's what I was asking, can you, yes, so
Yeah.
we did vote on that, and although I voted against it, waiting for the
So
stock
I'm-
assessment. But, so what you're saying is staff in the September meeting will present the wishes that came out of
Yes.
this motion
We always do.
to the commission.
Yes.
And the commission can choose to direct you to draft a regulation change and put out for public notice this, and it could be done before December 1st.
And that,
It's gonna have to be.
it has to. And
Well,
then,
that's why I'm saying it's possible for it, because I know
Yeah,
you've
we
got to
can
send
do
stuff.
that. We'll
It's
do it in
happening in
October.
October.
Yeah.
We'll do it in October.
and this
But
is
you
why
can
we're
do that-
having.
You can do that without, I thought you had a 45 delay in Richmond.
We're okay
State
now
delay.
for that. We're good.
We've got.
They know we have a time crunch.
Okay.
And that's why we're having the September request for public hearing, so we can bring all of this to the commission, they can hear it, and then bring back whatever we're bringing in October for their vote.
Okay, so just to be clear, that what happened today will be shared.
Always is.
Board, but in relation to what you were tasked with around the dredge fishery, the response will essentially be recommendation to close.
Yeah, we will not have, at this point, we don't have a recommendation for what a dredge fishery would look like,
Yeah. and
because
it's-
we haven't discussed it.
And it's, this committee's, has voted that there needs to be continued exploring of options.
And we will
Yeah.
absolutely be doing that when we're not on a 2-month time
Yeah,
crunch.
So just clarifying, did you have more clarification?
No, it's pretty good. Yeah,
Okay.
we're okay.
Anything else that we need to talk about before we hear from the very patient public?
Question, so does this mean that this CMAQ
it's open until after the stock assessment. So it's.
In order to meet CMAC's recommendation, the commission would have to close the dredge
We'll have to
fishery.
close the fishery this year.
Would have to, okay.
And if we don't do, right now, if we don't do anything, because we repealed the regulation we had, it would open on December first.
But you still don't have a
Maybe not.
license.
If you don't have a license, based on my question,
Yes,
if you don't have a
potentially,
license,
yes.
you may, it may not
But,
open.
yeah.
That's why we're
Not
trying to
unless-
avoid that
That's why we-
situation.
That's why we're doing this in October.
And what fraction of December catches females?
I can look into that.
90%.
Depends on where you are. Where I am, it's not 90%. I don't know what the overall numbers would be, but where I work now.
Well, and I can also look at it by area. That's
So
interesting.
Lots more to still look into. It seems like, we got there somehow to a pretty robust outcome of this meeting. So congratulations to you all for that.
As we move into public comment, I did want to have to open the presentation. I do want to share again the public comment opportunities after today. So you can come and speak at the December 24th commission meeting, at the Monday, October 28th commission meeting, in the 2 weeks prior to the October 28th meeting, not the September? Yes, we'll have the public notice will be published, and after that, you can also submit your comments on the agency website and Virginia Town Hall. These slides will be posted after the meeting, so these web addresses will be accessible, and you can also contact staff. We can get them to you. But we will also be reporting on comments from CMAC and from the public at CMAC.
Okay, so members of the public, thank you for being here and for waiting. Does anyone have a comment they'd like to share? No? Okay, well, in that case, I think we can adjourn earlier than I expected. So congratulations, everyone. Nice work.